very TikTok famous, as well as being a very accomplished surgeon. She goes by the handle Little Miss Diagnosed, which, as you know, is the title of her book. And for those of you that may not know her or haven't gotten a chance to read the book yet, she starts off the book with an incredibly personal story that happens to coincide with the beginning of her medical career. And I would love it if you could just give us that a little bit.
I think a lot of people know that July 1st is the day you don't want to be in the hospital, right? Because it's the first day when all of the new interns start. And so there's kind of a lot of, jokes about that and chatter about that. But, I was once in that position, July 4th weekend, and I'd waited my whole life to be an orthopedic surgeon. And one of my college roommates is here who could probably tell you, I always just set out to be an orthopedic surgeon, and that's what I was going to do. And so I finally made it. I matched at Lenox Hill Hospital, my dream hospital in Manhattan. I was all ready to go. And I was starting a night shift, which is scary to start off as your first day starting on nights, because if you don't know, after 10 p.m., the hospital is basically run by a bunch of 25-year-olds. And I was assigned my first patient to do a pre-op, and I get a call from my mom. I'm like, oh my God, stop calling me. This is my first day. But she wouldn't stop calling me. So I said, Mom, what's going on? And she said, well, it's Kevin, who's my middle brother. She said he hit his head in the pool, and there's bad reception. So I couldn't really figure out what was going on, but they're taking him to the hospital. I said, okay, well, it's July 4th weekend. It's all new doctors. Make sure that an attending radiologist reads the film and make sure nothing gets missed. So I go back to the pre-op. And then a couple minutes later, my youngest brother, Ryan, calls me. I'm like, oh, barrage of calls. And I said, I know, Kev hit his head. And he said, no, Erin, I don't think you understand. Kev, he can't move. He's in a helicopter on the way to Stony Brook. And I realized that he was paralyzed and a quadriplegic. And so I walked back to the surgeon's lounge, and I basically melted into a puddle on the floor. And that was kind of the start of my medical career. So I certainly wasn't expecting my own brother to become my first patient. And really, this book is about how that family tragedy shaped how I became a doctor.
And you've obviously told this story a lot on TikTok and in various other forms of media, but was it different for you to write about it? And was it painful to go back maybe when you're writing, you're recalling more details? You're not going to be as brief as you are in a quick little discussion like this. Tell me a little bit about what that felt like for you, writing that, and that being the intro. Was what you wrote first? Did you know you wanted to start the book like that?
Well, when I first decided to post this story on TikTok, I always believe that everyone has one Netflix-worthy story about their life, and I knew that this was my story. So I asked Kevin, I said, hey, Kev, I'm thinking about doing this post online about my first day of work from my perspective. Do you mind if I do that? And he said, absolutely. For my family members who are here, they know he's a total ham. And he absolutely loved, how the story came out. And what was interesting was I had really not necessarily thought about writing a book before. And I was approached to write this book based off of all of these stories that I had told online. So when I started to think about, what would a book look like, not every TikTok story is a chapter, right? And so it actually was a lot of work to think about. Some of the stories are just crazy stories, like absolutely nuts, being an orthopedic surgeon, being in Manhattan. But why was I telling this story? What was the point of this story? And that was, I think, the work that was involved in writing the book, was figuring out, okay, what is the message that I want to convey with each story? And that was something very different from doing the 3-minute videos online. So it was a lot, I would say, more like soul searching about what the meaning of it. And sometimes I didn't even know what the meaning of each story was that I had told. And I think that was the hard part.
So when you're writing, obviously she's brilliant. She has been through a million years of school and incredible. But writing is a very different animal than practicing medicine. And even writers, you know, I write 90 times out of 10, I'm looking at a blank page being like, I can't do this. So I would love to hear a little bit about you transitioning into writing and what the challenges were writing this book, if things came easy for you.
So I think actually my training as an orthopedic surgeon really served me well, because I still practice, I still see patients, I still do 100 other things. I'm a mom. And I would always do, I just called it my bonus work, whether it was filming TikTok videos from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. That was my, like, you know, I would always designate that time to be creative. So I have to say, writing each chapter was an absolute joy. It was very cathartic to write a lot of the chapters. And, you know, some things where I told this story called Glasses, and on the TikTok video, it's called My Most Embarrassing Story. And it's about when I was a medical student. I'm all nervous. I'm on this away rotation at Lenox Hill. I don't want to mess up. I'm, you know, trying to be, you know, do everything right. And I'm standing behind the attending and the scrub tech, and he asked me a question. Can you identify this, you know, vessel over here? And I lean over and my glasses fall off my face onto the patient, which is just like absolutely mortifying. And I kind of run out of the OR and I'm crying and I'm just absolutely devastated. It's like, they're never going to pick me. I can't show my face ever again. And that was kind of like the story that I told online. But what I didn't realize or remember was the second half to that day was when I went to go back into the OR to grab my coat and my things that I left in the room. The surgeon had put another set of gloves and gown for me to come back into the surgery. And I said, he's inviting me back in. And so I scrub in and, you know, I'm just putting my hands, I'm not going to mess up again. I'm just trying to like be invisible. And he actually moves the tray of instruments to the bottom of the patient so that I can stand directly next to him and actually have, you know, a great view. And it was really a lesson in grace and, you know, forgiveness, and really like learning to forgive myself, because I think a lot of women can relate to this, but we're under such pressure to be perfect all the time, and mistakes happen. Mm-hmm. And what I learned is it's not about when or if you're going to make a mistake, but what is your reaction to it. And to have that attending have such like a public display of support for someone who was so like early in their career, you know, that didn't even like clock with me at the time, but now looking back and thinking about that story is what's like so meaningful about it.
Was it really when you were just writing the book that you remembered that second part?
Well, it really was, you know, I was so focused on the embarrassment of like the glasses falling. Like that's, if you asked me that story, like that's what I just tell. I say, oh my God, you would not believe it. My glasses like fell on the patient. But it wasn't until I had to sit down and, you know, like write this chapter that it was that second part that was actually like the most meaningful part about it.
That's incredible. As you mentioned, not every TikTok story is worthy of being a chapter in the book, but I'm wondering how you chose the cases. If you wrote a ton more and this was edited down, if there were some that you wish made it, maybe like one that you're like, oh, I feel like I should have swapped that for another one that was maybe stronger.
Mm-hmm. You know, that was the hardest part about writing the book, was picking the stories, because I have over 1,000 posts online. So I have a lot of material. There's a lot of source material. But for example, like one of my most viral posts was about my time in shock trauma. It's probably the hardest case I've ever been part of. It was a man, an elderly man. He was blind and mute, and he was visiting his family. The family went to church. He was left by himself in their house, and their dog started to attack him. And the dog, in essence, he was eaten alive by this dog. And so he comes to Baltimore Shock Trauma, and I said, I was sitting in the room with, you know, the urology resident and the plastic surgery resident, and we're all paged at the same time, like everything's going off, and we're all responding to this one trauma, which is just, it all took our breath away to see him like that. So, you know, that, you know, was telling that story online was incredibly viral. but it wasn't a chapter like worthy story, because it kind of like ended there. And I mean, I did, help treat him for the rest of his course, but that's an example of something where I didn't necessarily think it fit into a lot of the larger themes of the book. So, things that I probably don't talk about as much online, but are in the book, is a lot about like the sexism in medicine. And I think I probably don't do as much talking about online because I don't want it to come across as if I'm like complaining or I'm ungrateful for the opportunity that I have. And what I write in the book about is a lot of these, the chapter, like the day the dicks came down and all of these like examples of sexist behavior. Part of why I never spoke out about it is because I really thrived in that environment, right? I have 3 brothers. I know how to take a joke. I can give it right back to people. And what I realized is that by me not speaking out, I made it harder for the next woman to bring that up. And that's kind of what I wanted to really like make a statement in this book, is to say, okay, like this is going on. I mean, it was only 10 years ago when they asked me to tell a dirty joke in my fellowship interview. So this is not that far off. But I wanted to kind of really focus on those themes that a 2-minute TikTok just doesn't do it justice.
Another theme that you write about a lot is hope, which is something that I personally don't really equate with doctors. I don't know if anybody else necessarily does. We think it's very just by the book and the data. I'd love if you would talk a little bit about why that was so important to you, and not only the message in the book, but how you really try to incorporate it into your practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I write about how, so Kevin, when he had his injury, even though I was an orthopedic surgeon, even I did not understand the potential for recovery from someone who had a spinal cord injury and was quadriplegic. So pretty much he was completely paralyzed from the neck down, almost no movement, nothing. He had a facility, and my mom and I were sure that he's warm. So move like ever so slightly. I go, Kev, did you see your toe? I was like, I swear it's moving. And he said, I admit it because I didn't want it to be wrong. That spark of hope was what kept him going, right? He never wanted to hear, we're like, oh, do you want to meet other people who are a quadriplegic and how they like get on with their life? He only wanted to talk to other people who had full recoveries, So he's like, is all about the hope. And I realized for my own patients, like I have to be that source of hope for them, right? Even if I know like, okay, this is really slim, or I'm not sure what it's going to be like that hope is what drives them. It's what the family clings to. And so that's what I always strive when I'm, I was a traumatologist for a long time. I saw people who were thrown out of cars, who were run. We always try and
in that line between, having been one of those families and being a surgeon and not wanting to give them false hope.
I think if anything, it's more about communication. And this is where I think the modern medical system is severely lacking. As a resident, we would always do our rounds at 5 a.m. Why? Because everyone's asleep. And so no one's bothering us. No one's asking questions because we've got to do 20 dressing changes before we're ready to go to the OR at 7 a.m., which is good for us, but it's not good for the families, right? They're like, where's my doctor? I never saw my doctor. I want to ask him a question. What time is this? When do you think I'm going home? So having that experience with Kevin and really appreciating the times that the doctors did stay to talk to us and to explain things in a language that we could understand. I talk a lot about how part of going to medical school is you are learning another language. You spend 4 years to learn another language because we need to communicate with one another. And part of our job is to be the interpreter for our patients, right? But we are not doing a good job with that. And unfortunately, I think part of it is due to the system, right? Where no doctor wants to only spend 5 minutes with their patient, but they're being told to see 40 patients in a day. So it's not tenable to have enough time for the doctors to listen to you, to examine you, to come up with a diagnosis and then explain what you have wrong with you. And I don't have the answer to that, but I think part of it is recognizing our part in the system so that we can call for change.
I feel like there are a couple of instances. You mentioned the day the Dix came down, and then another patient you had that was a construction worker that was very timely, and you really showed in the book how you've tried to advocate for being these voice for the patients when not necessarily everybody else at the hospital wanted that. Can you tell me if you faced any backlash from that, or how you were able to do that when nobody else was stepping up to the plate?
You know, at the time, these were decisions that I wasn't thinking I'm some like hero making these choices. I was just being human. And if that meant sneaking in a patient under a John Doe name or exaggerating my concern about an emergency so that someone who didn't have insurance was able to get their care. You know, I'm not calling for doctors to go totally rogue and do these things. But I think there are moments where, and I talk a lot about this, doctors are being put in these ethical dilemmas every day, right? The story about the construction worker and me tracking him down and putting him under a John Doe to operate on him, this is like a really grand example. But, you know, if I know that a patient needs physical therapy and I know that Aetna is not going to give it if I say she has carpal tunnel, well, I'm going to say that she has trigger finger, right? And yes, these are moments that we choose to do, which technically are not right. Maybe they may not be legal, but they're moral, right? And that's, I think, we are being put in positions where our Hippocratic oath is sometimes in direct competition with what the system wants.
I'd love to hear about how you got the name, or you chose the name Little Misdiagnosed.
Well, I had another TikTok channel, it's actually still there, called The Hand Doctor. I was like, this is a day in the life of, you know, me as a hand surgeon. And then one day I got a DM, and you didn't even know doctors had DMs, but we're just like everyone. We have DMs. And it was, it said, the subject was desperate, and said, "Dear Dr. Nance, I don't normally talk to strangers on the internet, but I'm desperate. I've had 10 years of severe fingernail pain, and no one believes me. I've seen 5 doctors. They tell me nothing's wrong with me. They make me feel like I'm crazy, but I swear if I just brush it against something, I'll jump to the ceiling." And so I messaged her back, "Dear desperate, I also don't normally talk to strangers on the internet, but out of curiosity, do you have a little blue dot under your fingernail?" And she wrote back, "I do have a little blue dot under my fingernail." So I told her, "You're going to tell your doctor to get an MRI of your finger. It's going to show you have a glomus tumor. You're going to find a hand surgeon. They're going to take it out, and you're going to be cured." So about 6 weeks later, I get another DM, "OMG, Dr. Nance, I got the MRI. It showed I had a mass. The hand surgeon took it out. It's a glomus tumor. Like, thank you. I knew I wasn't crazy." And now what she didn't know is that if you type in Google PubMed glomus tumor, my name, or my maiden name, Erin McDermott, pops up because I'm the world's expert on glomus tumors. But she didn't know that when she reached out to me. And she was just looking for someone who would believe her, because if someone believed her, then someone could help her. And that was the very first story that I said, why did it take this woman 10 years to get diagnosed, especially when I knew the answer in 3 seconds? So I started the account Little Misdiagnosed. I put that story online, and I think it was viewed by over 1 million people in one day. Wow. And I think why it went viral, like, people don't know what a glomus tumor is. They have no idea, but they really resonated with not being believed, not being not having people not understand their pain, having doctors dismiss them, having doctors make them feel like they're crazy. So I just started talking about stories where I was helping my patients in these ways and solving, cases. And more the videos were just getting more and more traction. I started telling the stories about Kevin and my time as a resident. And now my channel is actually primarily me doing medical education based on the thousands and thousands of emails, DMs, comments from people asking me to share their story because they don't want other people to feel alone in their diagnosis. If it can help one person, they are thrilled to have their story told. So that's kind of where the channel is now. And then the podcast that I run, The Medical Detectives.
What do your kids think about you being an influencer, for lack of better term?
Well, I have a 9-year-old, and she is like mortified that I'm on TikTok. Her friends have seen me online, which is probably that. I was like, they shouldn't be watching that. I think she's very proud when she hears someone, like sometimes people will stop me on the street, and usually they'll say, "Thank you so much for your videos. Please don't stop making your videos. I wish you were my doctor." So I'm really proud that she can see me as that type of role model, because to be honest, she doesn't really know what I do, my day job, like as a doctor, surgeon, like actually seeing patients and being in the OR. But I do also want to show her that even though I'm a surgeon, I'm very like science heavy, that I also have this creative side to me, and that I'm just as successful doing something creative as something very technical. And I think it's important for her to see that you can have more than one life in your lifetime. And so now I would say I'm in my like media era. But for me, it kind of all goes back to I'm always going to be rooted as a physician, as an expert, and all of these projects, whether it's the book or the podcast or my app, like that expertise is like the root.
Well, I was actually just going to ask you to talk about your app. I know that's what's next on the horizon for you. So if you could just share with all of us what it is and when it's launching.
Of course. So after creating 150 million viewed videos on TikTok, I really understood that power that physicians have on social media. I really see it as an extension of our expertise online. And the problem is that, listen, the doctors are doing an incredible job online. The platforms that exist, TikTok, Reddit, Facebook, Instagram, they're not credible platforms. And unfortunately, they will promote either negative information or misinformation over the credible content. So I said, I want to create a space where it's a safe and trusted place for people to get their medical information. And they know that the content is coming from verified, vetted, credible health experts. And that's really the basics of it. Eventually, what I would love it to become is for, let's say you're a woman who has endometriosis. There's no one you trust more than another woman with endometriosis. But unfortunately, most people, they don't know anyone else who has endometriosis, and none of their friends have it, none of their family members. And so they end up feeling alone in this journey when there are millions of people with endometriosis. There's absolutely no reason why they should not be connected with someone else who has endometriosis. And what I was noticing is that on my videos, I'd make a post about ovarian cancer. 2 million people would watch it. There'd be 10,000 comments. But it was really the people in the comments were helping one another talk about, well, was my experience. This is what happened to me. And what I really see as the future of the app, which is called Feel Better, BETR, is that it's a place where both physician expertise and the patient experience is equally visible and valued.
Wow. And when is that coming out?
It's technically up already
Okay.
on the App Store, but it hasn't launched publicly. But yeah, it's called Feel Better, BETR. And I liken it to just a modern WebMD. So if you feel like we could do a lot better than WebMD, then this is the start.
Great. Well, I'd love to open it up to questions. If any of you guys have questions about the book, or I don't know, maybe you've got a hand issue that you want to get solved right now. Now is the time.
Medical advice.
Yeah.
Free medical advice.
Anyone? Were we that thorough? Come on, guys. Oh, yes.
You're so accomplished. And when do you sleep? I mean, my Lord. You said you are creative from 10 to 2. What time do you have to get up in the morning?
So you would think all the years of waking up at like 5 a.m. I would be a morning person. I am not a morning person. In fact, my daughter, she will sometimes have to be like, come on, mom, you got to walk me to school, at 7 a.m. So my husband kind of does the earlier shift. And then I start my day like a little bit later, not that much later. But what I have found is that I'm very good at like siloing my time, and I kind of do it by days. So on Wednesdays, that is my patient day. Do not schedule me a meeting. Do not schedule me a lunch. That is solely dedicated to my practice and to my podcast. My producer is here. So I kind of take those blocks like very sacred. Then like Mondays, I would say is more like my creative day where I will create content. Tuesdays, Thursdays, I have more meetings for like business purposes. And then just making sure that I also really block the time to go to my daughter's things, have dinner with my husband. I remember Joe and Trish, you always had Friday night, booked for dinner, date night growing up. It's like, yeah, well, I should like hold that time and space. Because like that 6 p.m. tennis with as that meeting with Pfizer to me. Keeps me energized, and that's what keeps me curious and interested in what I'm doing.
You seem to have a very good work-life balance. You talk about that a lot in the book too. So if you guys haven't read it, I took some tips from this that I am going to be implementing. Jill?
Can I use one? If anyone would like to see it, I have the glasses that she dropped in. And you can a show.
I'm surprised you didn't put it on eBay.
I tried. I'm holding out for a big price.
Yes.
Book 2.
Yes.
Save it for book 2.
Is a show like The Pit, which you may or may not have seen, but I didn't watch ER growing up, and I watched that and became an expert in everything that happens in the operating room. But a lot of stories like that, do you kind of run into those things? But like there are a lot of like patient-oriented stories that illuminate the doctors. And you spoke about that earlier, but I'm just kind of wondering, can you draw inspiration from a show like that in terms of telling future stories to your adoring public?
Well, I would characterize The Pit as like the doctor's doctor show, right? It's so realistic, and I think it took its cue from Grey's Anatomy. Is that the reason why people love Grey's Anatomy is not just because of like the crazy stories and the cases, but because it really showed the human aspect of the doctors, and it made them feel like real people. And that's what I think The Pit does such a great job at, right? Like I know that resident, when she is having the miscarriage in the bathroom stall, and she just walks right back out and sees the next patient, right? Like that is our actual life. So I think they do a phenomenal job. This book has already been optioned for television, so hopefully it will be the next show that you see on TV.
By who? You can't tell us who.
Yeah, by Jerry Bruckheimer, which you may have heard of him. And for this, I think they wanted to take it in the direction of this being like a medical Sex in the City and show what it's like for a young female, and like the pit is primarily like Noah Wiley. He's a gruff 50-year-old man, and they do show or share stories from like other characters. But my hope is that if the show ever gets made, that its focus is on what it's like being a young female, like in medicine.
I had a question. The glasses are. So I love that you're creating an app to use technology to give better people outcomes and information, because who knows what you can do. That's great. The big storyline right now in the medical community is AI, and how is that going to help people? And I know that doctors, you have to see 40 different patients. Can AI help you get through patients more, give them better care? What are you seeing? Because you're on the front lines of it. Is it really going to help, or is it going to hurt? What do you see AI doing in the future?
So I'll just give you an example. So Molly, who's our producer of the podcast, The Medical Detectives, these are stories of primarily women who have been misdiagnosed for, I would say on average, for 10 years. And we spend an hour with them recounting their stories. We're hearing their symptoms, their results and everything. And we have put every story into like ChatGPT, and they get the answer every time.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
Every single time. The right diagnosis.
Wow.
Every single time. So I think when I alluded to me getting like 10,000 emails, I still get thousands of emails. People will send me 10-page emails. Dr. Nance, I have da 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 da. And I tell them the same thing. I respond to everyone. And I tell them, go to ChatGPT, put in all of your symptoms, all of your test results, and ask for 5 differential diagnoses. Then I want you to go on to TikTok, and I want you to put that diagnosis in the search bar, and I want you to watch videos of other people sharing their experience with that condition. And then I want you to go to your doctor, a more educated and empowered patient, and say, hey, I recognize that I have X, Y, and Z. Do you think I could have endometriosis? Because as we were talking in the car before, the eye only sees what the mind knows. So not every doctor is created equal. So if you go and see a doctor and they don't know what endometriosis is, you're never being diagnosed with endometriosis. So I see AI as a tool to help both with diagnosis, to help keep up with the literature. I mean, especially in like oncology, it is impossible to keep up with all the research. And what I found out, all of our guests in our podcasts, is that in medicine, we make diagnosis based on pattern recognition, right? Like, okay, if 100 women have heavy bleeding and they have cramps, they probably have endometriosis. But in the end, you are an N of 1. And just because that study showed, well, statistically significant, that just means that 80% of people have this. And so I think the real power in AI is on personalized care, because again, your symptoms aren't going to match his symptoms, aren't going to match her symptoms. And only using AI as a tool, I think, is going to help you get to an answer sooner.
My sister-in-law just became a nurse about 2-3 years ago, and she's wonderful, but she's really taking it home. And she is up at night, like every night. Did I make a mistake? Your job is so life or death, literally. And I know she's new to it, but I'm like sitting there like, how can I help her recognize that she's doing such wonderful work? And that I asked my grandpa who's a doctor, and I was like, she's worried about making mistakes. He's like, yeah, you can't make mistakes. And I was like, that's not what I want to tell her. So I'm curious if you have thoughts on that.
So when I became an attending, so after you graduate your residency and your fellowship, you become an attending. And it's really that moment, you're like, oh, they're looking at me. They're like, I'm the one giving the answer. And the last chapter in this book, you'll find out how I became a solo private practitioner, because I was fired from my job for maternity reasons. And I would go to bed, and every morning I would wake up and my sheets would be soaked, absolutely soaked. Same thing every morning. I would go to bed, I could wring out the sheets with sweat. And I don't consider myself like an anxious person or anything, but what I didn't realize is that anxiety was manifesting in me sweating at night because I was terrified of making a mistake, of hurting someone, running a practice on my own, being sued. And I don't know like when things changed, and I've never been sued, but I think I just have to realize that I'm doing my best. I'm giving my all to my patients, and for me to be a better like person, I had to leave that at home. I couldn't keep carrying that and that weight of that and literally sweating it out from my pores. So yeah, it was a little bit of just like time to learn that lesson. But no, I mean, I guess I would be like 100 pounds if I kept that up. But yeah, it's really hard. And especially the nurses too, because they have a much more personal connection with the patients than the doctors. And we had this discussion yesterday about the difference between pediatrics and adults and how hard it is to treat a pediatric patient versus an adult patient. And if you're doing oncology versus, maybe like geriatrics. So every situation, you just have to understand you're doing your best. You still have to enable for you, or in order for you to show up for your patients, you do have to protect yourself. And I think that's like the best thing I could tell you. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Good diagnosis.
Yeah.
I don't have exactly a question because you actually answered lots of questions that was going to come up, but I experienced the very beginning was a little bit funny for me. Not the story, of course, of your brother, but the match day. I went through it twice, meaning I'm not a physician, but met my husband in first year of medical school, so I went. Match day is a long year of waiting and anxiety for you. And now I'm going in for the second time. My daughter is starting next week, and I'm going to make her watch this. And because I'm going to ask, what is your suggestion or a good tip or whatever? She needs to listen to the whole thing and maybe read the book. But just, I'm not sure. I want her to read the book before she starts. She has anxiety and excitement and all kinds of a personal situation that she has to do. So it's next week, July 1st.
Yes,
So
I know. So
went
she's
to this thing twice, and also being married to a physician. So many things that you talked. He was even sued, but he was working in Kaiser, so they protected him. So anyway, so I went through many of this.
I will say that, and I think part of this has to do with social media, that there is a lot more discussion about residents' mental health and general well-being. When I was a resident, so there's a famous case in New York. Her name is Libby Zion. She was the daughter of, I believe, the New York Times editor. She died in one of the hospitals, and the father attributed it to a resident who was overworked and made a medical error. And because of that, they passed the Libby Zion law, and it's the 80-hour work week. So that law came from Libby Zion case. And I was the last group to not be protected by the 80-hour work week. So I was working 100 to 110 hours per week. I worked Q2, which means you're on call for 36 hours every other night for weeks at a time. And it's not humane, right? And I think before you had a lot of old school doctors who's like, well, I did that, right? So you should do that. And that's how I became a good doctor. And that's why I'm, so compassionate with my patients, because I took ownership of them. And I mean, when I was on call, I would come home and my lips would be cracked and bleeding because I hadn't had water in 36 hours. I never went to the bathroom because I never had any water to drink. So they'd be like, how could you not drink? How did you not go to the bathroom in 36 hours? Well, if you don't drink water for 36 hours, you don't have to go to the bathroom. But I don't wish that on the next generation of residents, right? And I think that perspective that narrative is shifting, correct? But there's a lot of talk about residents unionizing because they have no protections right now. Whether or not, when I, as I said, that last chapter, I was 9 months pregnant. And when I got my first contract, there was no mention of maternity leave or like anything actually. And so when I asked about the call requirements, they just pulled the offer and they said the job no longer exists because they didn't want anyone questioning anything. And I think they realized early on if I was speaking up now, I was going to continue to ask questions and speak up. So some residency programs are unionizing. But yeah, there's a lot more talk about it. And I think also just mental health amongst doctors is a much more talked about topic. So I wish her luck and she can message me anytime. What field is she going into?
Primary care.
Primary care.
So was her father, who became a geriatrician as well. But he worked and I said, I would never go to a doctor who works 36 hours. It's like, it was, so me, the wife, that's another story. I can write a book about that.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
I think that's our time. Thank you so much for sharing all of this amazing information and your stories and being so vulnerable. Everybody, buy books, buy 2, buy 3, get them signed, personalized.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Abby.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we have plenty of books out front to be purchased, and we'll keep you guys perched right here.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.